Alright, so I decided that I want to make a couple videos talking about a character called Darkhawk. He's not very well known, but I think he's one of my favorite characters, and I think it's a character I think a lot of people should hear about. I think it's some character that a lot of people can like. I'm going to go over kind of just my opinions on him, why I think he's a good character, and then I'll make some videos about the more important storylines regarding him. There are some that are kind of just filler, but got a lot to choose from here. So, all right. So Darkhawk, he was created in 1991 um, by Tom DeFalco and Mike Manley. And if you look at just his first cover for the first issue right here, he looks pretty badass. In my opinion, he looks just like a more badass Power Ranger. Um, and what I think is so cool about him is that he is the most relatable character out there, or he was for the time. Um, in my opinion, I want to say that he is. Well, for the when this was released in 1991, he was the modern age Spider-Man. And what I mean by that is when Spider-Man was first released back in the beginning of the Marvel boom in the early 1960s, there weren't many. There weren't any actually. There weren't really any teenage superheroes. Had them as sidekicks. You had them as Bucky, Robin, Aqualad, Kid Flash. Anything like that. But you never had a teenage superhero just outright just on his own. And when they finally released Amazing Fantasy 15, that first appearance of Spider-Man, it sold like a bajillion copies. And it's because teenagers finally had a superhero they could relate to. It was a teenager, he goes through the same things that a lot of kids do. Well, apart from being bitten by a radioactive spider, but they have their school life they have to deal with. They have their personal life, whatever maybe things they have, like other things they have going on, and a lot of people relate to it, and that's why it sold so well. And but getting back to Darkhawk, that's why I consider him the Spider-Man of the modern age, because obviously you still had a Spider-Man, in the night. Well, obviously still now, but he was still pretty popular in the early 1990s. But at that point, he was, they had to age him because he'd been around for 30 some years. So he wasn't, he wasn't the nerdy teen anymore. He was an adult. He was married. I think he was a school teacher, partially. So so teens at the time didn't really have relatable teenager. And even with Spider-Man, he was, the stories may not have aged very well. If you're going to be in the early 90s, you're not really going to relate to a kind of you know, a nerdy, a nerdy kid in the 60s, where everyone was wearing, bow ties and sweater vests and, oh, Peter Parker, you square, let's go get some milkshakes at the mall shop. It's very, not very 90s. So that's why I think Darkhawk, who's a teenager named Chris Powell, I think he's very relatable because he's just a normal kid. He's not a geek. He's not a jock. He's just a normal kid with a normal family. He wasn't abandoned by his parents or with his aunt and uncle. He had parents. He had a dad who was a cop. His mom was a lawyer, and he had two younger siblings. He had twin brothers, um, Jonathan and Jason. So he's just like a normal kid. A lot of the kids who similar to all the kids who were reading comics at the time. and he goes through things that I think that everyone goes through. Everyone goes through, I think, some sort of, maybe tragedy or whatever. Not nothing major, but everyone has their problems. And I think the problem that, well, one of the problems that Chris has to deal with is that he finds out that his dad, who was a cop, he was a crooked cop. He was taking bribes from a mob boss named Philip Bazin, who was actually the same mob boss that Chris's mom was working to take down using the law. And when this happens, when Chris's dad, the cop, when he finds out that his son knows about his secret, that he was taking money from a mob boss, he leaves and he abandons his family. And that, I think, is something that a lot of people can relate to, unfortunately. Whether it be, problems with with the parents, or death, or imprisonment. It happens more than anyone would like it to. But that's why, again, I think a lot of people can relate to that. They can relate to the losing of a parent. And when that does happen, it affects people in a lot of ways too, especially kids. And that's why even now, even though these comics came out before I was even born, reading them now, I can relate to it, especially at the time, because I had a parent who was gone for a couple of years, and I had to deal with that. And I had younger siblings, and I had to deal with them, going through all that. And that's what Chris has to do in this situation. But on top of that, he also has to worry about being a superhero, because he gets an amulet which gives him the Darkhawk armor, and that's why he turns into that. And he has to now, and then he takes it upon himself, to become a superhero. And one thing, again, we'll compare it to Spider-Man. So he has this terrible thing happen to him, and then he comes across this thing that gives him this immense power. He has all these emotions going on from this tragedy in his life, and then he gets this immense power. He has all these emotions. He has anger. He has sadness. He has confusion. And then he gets power, and then he goes out and he kicks some ass with it, because he's letting his emotions get the best of him. Going back to Spider-Man, he got his powers, and then he didn't use them. Then it had something bad happen to him, and then he learned great power comes great responsibility. Now with Darkhawk, this bad thing happened. He got powers. He goes and kicks some ass. And it is kind of funny, because if Darkhawk actually does team up with Spider-Man in issues, not team up, but they cross paths in issues 2 and 3, and they are not friends at this point, because you have Spider-Man, who knows great power comes great responsibility. Granted, he's been at it for a long time, but he learned that. Darkhawk has not learned that yet. So he is ready to use that power, and he's ready to kill people and this and that. And I kind of like how he has to slowly learn over that. Granted, he does eventually learn that from Spider-Man, not in the Darkhawk run, but in an Amazing Spider-Man issue. They end up teaming up, and he learns that lesson from Spider-Man.